I always knew I was invisible in my family. It wasn't just about being the older child or being independent. It was about the fact that my sister, Rachel, had been born 2 months early, a fragile little thing. And from that moment on, she became the center of my parents' universe. I don't even remember when it fully started, but I knew it had been this way for as long as I could recall. Growing up, I worked hard for everything. I got straight A's, I won awards, I joined every extracurricular I could fit into my schedule. But every achievement of mine was met with polite indifference at best. My mother would glance up from whatever she was doing and murmur something like, "That's nice, Sarah," before turning her attention back to Rachel's latest soccer game or flute recital. My dad wasn't much better. He loved Rachel's big, bubbly personality, the way she filled a room with her energy, while I was always too quiet, too reserved, too much in the background. The first real heartbreak came when I was 12. I had spent months preparing for my school's talent show, teaching myself how to play bridge over troubled water on the piano. It was supposed to be a big deal. I had worked so hard. But on the night of the show, Rachel had a slight fever, 99.1 degrees, nothing serious, and my parents decided that meant they had to stay home with her. No one came. 2 weeks later, when Rachel had a 15-minute flute recital where she barely managed to play hot cross buns, my entire family, including both sets of grandparents, showed up to cheer for her like she had just performed at Carnegie Hall. I learned my lesson then, but even that was nothing compared to Thanksgiving. It all started when I offered to have the meal catered. My mother had been complaining about back pain, and I thought it would be a nice gesture. She hesitated, worrying about the cost, but I assured her I had saved up. She didn't know that my idea of saving up was a little different than what she imagined. The day of Thanksgiving, everything was perfect. The food was incredible, better than anything my mom had ever made, though no one said that out loud. But of course, Rachel had to find a way to make the night about her. I had stepped away from the table for just a few minutes to check on a high-profile auction I was monitoring on my laptop. My company, a jewelry authentication firm, was in the middle of verifying a rare Art Nouveau necklace for a collector in Hong Kong. The numbers on my screen weren't just impressive, they were staggering. Rachel, of course, barged in without knocking. She took one look at my screen, and I saw the smug expression creep onto her face. "Let's show everyone what Sarah's really been up to," she said, grabbing my laptop and marching back to the dining room. I followed, my stomach twisting into knots. "Look at this," Rachel announced, spinning my laptop around for the whole family to see. Silence. Mom chuckled. "Don't be silly. Sarah works at that little antique shop." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "No, Mom. I own one of the largest jewelry authentication companies in the country." The room exploded. Mom's face turned red, then purple. "You have millions and you let us struggle?" "Struggle?" I scoffed. "I send you $7,000 every month." "While sitting on millions?" she shrieked. "Your sister has student loans?" Rachel burst into tears. Dad slammed his fork down. "How could you be so selfish?" he demanded. "We raised you." I laughed. I couldn't help it. After all these years, after everything, this was what it came down to. "Raised me," I snapped. "You ignored me. You let me fend for myself while Rachel got everything she ever wanted. You missed every achievement, every milestone because she might feel left out. You didn't save a single penny for my education, but you took out loans for her. And now you're mad that I built something for myself?" The table erupted into yelling. Mom was screaming about family obligations. Dad was shouting about ungrateful children. Rachel was alternating between sobbing and demanding to know exactly how much money I had. I picked up my laptop, grabbed my Hermes bag, one Mom had once called a cheap knockoff, and walked out. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. "We'll just have her set up trust funds. Rachel, how much do you need for your MBA?" I ignored their calls. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with texts. "Mom, how dare you walk out on family?" "Mom, we need to talk about this like adults." "Mom, your sister deserves a share of your success." "Mom, I already called a realtor about a new house." Rachel, of course, went straight to Facebook. "My sister has been hoarding millions while we struggled. The betrayal is unreal." And suddenly, people I hadn't spoken to in years, distant cousins, High school classmates had opinions. Then came the flying monkeys. Aunt Susan. Family is everything, Sarah. Uncle Bob. You should be ashamed. Money doesn't replace love. Third cousin's wife's sister. I just think it's really sad how you abandoned your family. But the real kicker? They showed up. Monday morning. I walked into my office to find Mom, Dad, and Rachel sitting in my lobby. We've had a family discussion, Mom said sweetly. I sighed. A discussion without me? We think it's only fair you set up trust funds for the family. Rachel crossed her arms. I need at least $2 million to start my new life properly. Dad nodded. And your mother and I would like to retire. We're thinking Florida. I stared at them. Did you miss the part where I've been paying your bills for years? Rachel rolled her eyes. That was nothing compared to what you have. You owe us. I took out my phone and, right there in front of them, canceled the monthly transfers. Mom gasped. Rachel's fake tears turned real. Dad looked like he was about to have a stroke. You can leave now, I said calmly. Security escorted them out. It was over. 6 months later, my company was thriving. My phone was blissfully quiet. Rachel still posted passive-aggressive updates about toxic wealth and family betrayal. Mom and Dad rewrote history, claiming they never wanted my money anyway. I didn't care. One evening, Grandma Marie came to visit. She sipped her tea and smiled at me. Good for you, sweetheart, she said. Some people are only family by blood, not by heart. I exhaled, feeling lighter than I ever had before. Yeah, I said. It just took me $12 million to figure it out. A week after Thanksgiving, I thought the storm had finally passed. I had cut off my family financially, changed my numbers, and even hired a lawyer to send them a formal notice warning them to stop harassing me. But I underestimated just how desperate they were. One evening I was at home, enjoying a glass of wine after a long day at work, when my security system sent an alert to my phone. Motion detected at my front gate. I frowned, checking the camera feed. It was my mother. She was standing outside in the cold, pacing, her coat wrapped tightly around her. I sighed, debating whether to ignore her. But something in my gut told me to deal with this now, before she tried something worse. I opened the door but didn't step outside. Mom, what are you doing here? I asked, my voice cold. She turned, her face pale but her eyes burning with determination. Sarah, we need to talk. We already talked, I said. You demanded money. I said no. Conversation over. She let out a shaky breath. Please, just hear me out. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside, crossing my arms. Fine. Talk. She hesitated, then said, Your father and I are losing the house. I blinked. Excuse me? The mortgage payments? We fell behind. We took out loans for Rachel's education, and with your father's medical bills. I cut her off. You mean the mortgage I've been paying for years? She flinched, but quickly recovered. We didn't know you would stop sending money so suddenly. We counted on it. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. So let me get this straight. You expected me to keep funding your lives indefinitely, even after you demanded even more from me? You wanted me to hand over my savings, my hard-earned success, just because Rachel needed another bailout? Sarah, please, she whispered. We're your family. I clenched my jaw, trying to suppress the anger rising inside me. You weren't my family when you sent me away every time I sneezed. You weren't my family when you missed every milestone of my life. You weren't my family when you called me selfish for building something of my own. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. Sarah, I know we made mistakes, she said, her voice cracking, but we're drowning. We have nowhere else to turn. That's not my problem, I said simply. Her face twisted in anger. You owe us. I don't owe you a damn thing, I snapped. You made your choices. You prioritized Rachel over everything, and now you're paying the price. And you know what? For the first time in my life, I don't care. Her eyes filled with tears, but I had seen this act before. Goodbye, Mom, I said, stepping back inside. Sarah, if you don't help us, we'll lose everything. I hesitated just for a second. Then I met her gaze and said, then lose it. And I shut the door in her face. Araninem. 2 days later, the firestorm hit. Rachel had gone nuclear on social media. I can't believe my own sister abandoned us. While she sits on her millions, my parents are about to be homeless. All she had to do was help, but no. Some people only care about money. I guess blood doesn't mean anything to some people. SMH. The comment section exploded. Distant relatives, old classmates, random internet strangers, all jumping in to attack me. What kind of monster lets their parents lose their home? Money changes people. She probably thinks she's better than everyone now. I always knew Sarah was selfish. Poor Rachel, always had to fight for attention. What a disgrace. I closed the app, my hands shaking. Not because of the hate, but because I realized just how far they were willing to go. They had played their final card, public shame. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them win. That evening, I called my lawyer. They want to play dirty, I said, gripping my phone tightly. Fine, let's play. And that was the beginning of the end. I sat by the large window of my new office, sipping a cup of coffee as I overlooked the city skyline. The morning sun painted the buildings in soft gold, a sight that once felt unreachable, but was now my reality. I had spent my entire life fighting for recognition, for a place where I wasn't just an afterthought in someone else's story. Now I had it, not because of them, but despite them. The lawsuit had been filed. My lawyer assured me that my parents and Rachel had no legal claim to my wealth, but we needed to put a formal end to their harassment. The legal letter had been delivered, warning them that any further defamation or harassment would result in court action. Their reaction was predictable: rage, denial, and desperate last-ditch efforts to manipulate. Rachel had tried to guilt-trip me through social media, but the sympathy she expected didn't come. People began questioning her narrative. Distant family members messaged me, not to attack, but to ask if she had really tried to steal from me. Some even apologized for their previous messages, realizing they had been played. The tides were turning. Mom and Dad, once so sure that I would come running to fix their mess, were now scrambling. The house they had been so desperate to keep, it was gone. They had to move into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Rachel, so used to having everything handed to her, was now forced to deal with the reality of her own poor choices. She had tried to start her own jewelry authentication business, using my reputation to gain attention, but it failed spectacularly. Turns out, scamming people by passing off cheap fakes as real gold wasn't a sustainable business model. They were suffering, and yet I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, just relief. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by their expectations, their demands, their manipulation. I was free. I took another sip of coffee and smiled as my assistant knocked on the door. "Your 10 o'clock meeting is here," she said. "Send them in," I replied, straightening my posture. This was my life now, my business, my success, my happiness. And no one could take it from me. But sometimes, late at night, a part of me wondered, would they ever truly let go? Or was this just the beginning of another storm waiting to strike? What do you think? Would you have helped them if you were in my position, or was cutting them off the only way? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do so for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless.